Welcome to the Bible and Theology Matters podcast,
where we discuss all things Bible and theology.
Because it matters. What you really believe determines how you really behave.
Now, here is your host, Associate Professor of Bible Exposition at Dallas Theological Seminary
and Professor of Bible and Theology for the National Theological College and Graduate School,
Dr. Paul Weaver.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whatever time it is when you're watching or listening to this podcast. I'm your host, Paul Weaver, and I have the wonderful privilege each week of leading conversations with some of my favorite Bible scholars and Bible expositors. And I'm very excited to have Dr. John Hanna on this edition of the Bible and Theology Matters podcast. We will be discussing the history and legacy of Dallas Theological Seminary. Dr. Hanna has taught at Dallas Theological Seminary for more than 40 years and associated as a student and then a professor for more than 50 years. Dr. Hanna earned a Master of Theology from Dallas Theological Seminary, a Master of Arts from Southern Methodist University, a Doctor of Theology from Dallas Theological Seminary, and a second doctorate, a Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Texas at Dallas. He also completed additional postdoctoral work at Yale University. Dr. Hanna has written many journal articles and has authored many different books, including a 2-volume set on church history, a book on the history of doctrine, and a fascinating read on the history of Dallas Theological Seminary entitled Uncommon Union. Dr. Hanna, welcome to the Bible and Theology Matters podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me come.
It's a pleasure to have you. Well, I'm excited to have a conversation with you today about the history of Dallas Theological Seminary, and you've been around for how many years?
I came in 1967, so 57 years maybe.
So well over half of the
life of the school.
100 years of the school. Mm-hmm. So first as a student, and then as a professor.
Yes, that's right. Never dreamt it.
Well, I'm excited to discuss, for our listening audience, I'll be using the main chapters in Dr. Hanna's book entitled An Uncommon Union, subtitled Dallas Theological Seminary and American Evangelicalism. We'll use that as the guide for our conversation today. It's a fascinating book. Dr. Hanna, the second chapter, but actually I'd like to share with you first. This book came out in, do you remember the year around?
No, about 2000 maybe.
Okay. So I was directing the Bible Institute in Hungary at the time, and we'd have different professors come over and from DTS, and they still do. And Dr. Eugene Pond came over, and he brought me as a gift this book. And I read it from cover to cover pretty quickly, trying to find all the dead bodies where they are buried. Yes. It's a very interesting book. I really appreciated the history that you provided there.
Good.
And so was that, what was the thinking behind or the desire to write this book?
Well, I think I wanted to understand the school, its heritage, because if you do, you begin to understand some of the rhetoric and how they use the rhetoric. And so even though I came from a Bible college tradition through the seminary, I just wanted to understand it more deeply and care for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so before we hit record, we talked about you're from New Jersey originally.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you went to Philadelphia College
of Bible, and then came here for THM, THD. Never planned my course, but then I was asked to stay a year, and I did, and it has now become 53. The Lord's just been good, and then I picked up an MA from SMU and a PhD from UT. Mm-hmm. So, but none of that was planned. I just didn't know what the Lord wanted me to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've had a series on the life of Charles Ryrie. I've written a little booklet on his life. And he was the president at Philadelphia College of Bible for a period of time.
Just before me.
Okay.
I came in 63. And so the waves were still there, but I didn't have that connection.
So he returned here
to
be then the head of the theology department and the first THD back then, right? First.
That's right.
So
That's what I took here at THD.
so you studied under him then.
I took courses from him, but most of it was shaded toward historical theology. And, of course, in the doctoral program, he was the head of it.
Okay, so you had him at both the master's level and at the doctoral level. Okay, very good. Well, Dr. Hanna, the second chapter of your book is on the early years of Lewis Sperry Chafer. Would you share with our listeners and viewers what we should know about Chafer's life as a child and growing up?
Well, Dr. Chafer, of course, came from a Christian home. His father, Thomas Franklin, was a pastor and missionary. He graduated from Auburn Theological Seminary in 1865, troubled by health that would take his life in 1882, tuberculosis. And so he is raised in a Christian family. His father was a pastor for some time, but then because of health reasons thought the frontier would be better. So he was a missionary with the American Board of Missions and labored outside of Wichita, Kansas for some years. In fact, while he was there, Dr. Chafer was born, apart from his family.
Okay, so that was the frontier, Kansas.
Yeah, that was the frontier. When you read his diaries, he talks about wildfires and Indians. And
Interesting. Wow, that would be a fascinating way to grow up, wouldn't it?
yeah, he had a good father. He had, when you read the data, he had a very happy home, filled with music. He pastored several churches, one in Smithfield, Pennsylvania, and he remembers Christmas coming and things like that.
So, just to try to get the point of reference, Dr. Chafer's father went out to Kansas before or after the Ohio time. The Ohio time would be as a farmer, right?
he was in Ohio for a short stint as pastor, and I think Lomira and the three children, well, as they emerge, stayed in Ohio when he went out. He built a cabin. He bought land right near Wellington, Kansas, right almost on the border of Oklahoma. So he was gone in that time. Then when he returned to the church, pastored there.
So in his missionary efforts or his trips to Kansas, his family wasn't with him. They stayed in Ohio.
They couldn't come. Yeah. It was a hard time for him. But he went for it for the sake of the gospel, but also for his tuberculosis. That eventually took him. He even traveled down into West Virginia to spas for months at a time because he was coughing up phlegm and just awful. They took him to St. Louis to a doctor at the end, and that's when he succumbed.
So how did Chafer, Lewis Sperry Chafer and his mother, how did they provide for the family as the father was on these trips? The church did.
Yeah.
Okay.
They basically gave him the parsonage, which was nice. It was, and his mother was a teacher in the local schools. So between the two, it balanced.
Was this common or uncommon for this type of
it's quite
scenario?
uncommon.
Yes.
The frontier was just so rugged, but I think they agreed to let him go because of his health needs, and just sad.
Must have been a strong wife to be able to...
Lomira was, and they had, of course, three children. Roland was the oldest, Marietta was the middle, and Lewis came last.
Okay, and of course we'll learn more about Roland. Is it Roland or
Roland? Roland Thomas.
Roland. So,
Name of his dad.
okay. So Chafer has fond memories of growing up.
He played the cornet. His brother played the violin, and Marietta played the piano. But the house was full of music. And Christmas was, when you read the material, it just became a special time.
And no sense of any bitterness towards his father for being away.
No, you don't sense that at all. No, I think his dad was heroic. He only knew him till he was 10, but that's about the context that he came to know the Lord.
What was the story background for that?
His dad led him to Christ.
Okay.
As pastor in Smithfield. And he wrote in his Bible that he'd come to the Lord.
So, Lewis Sperry Chafer felt calling to train for music at Oberlin. Tell us a little bit more about that.
He was very influenced by a man that his mother, Lomira, arranged for him to study under in his, what we call it, secondary school. And it was really a proprietary school. So from there, Dr. Chafer goes, and so does Rollin, goes to Oberlin College. He is only there for 3 semesters, over 2 years. He trains in the Observatory of Music. And then right after, he doesn't really have an undergraduate degree, but in 1892, he joins an evangelist, because his passion is that. A.T. Reed, an Ohio evangelist, who later will marry he and his wife Lorraine. And he travels with A.T. Reed to about 1896. He sets up the tent, he distributes the hymnals and all that jazz, and he sings because he had a beautiful voice. And in 1896, he marries a lady, actually an orphan, from Ellington, New York. And he then is the senior, he becomes sort of the resident musician, song leader, worship leader in Painesville, Ohio. And he's there and still travels in evangelism, but he joins with his wife as a team. So she plays the piano. She played the piano at the Northfield conferences later. She was that good.
So Oberlin at the time, did it have any religious affiliation?
It did. It was congregational. It's still in the ilk of Charles Finney, good and bad.
Okay.
But Chafer doesn't take academic college courses. I don't mean music isn't. Yeah. But he's in the music school, which at that day was one of the best in the country.
Okay.
And he thought he would, and he taught music, of course, later in his first book. His first published book was on music. Very, very well trained, but he has also this, I think passion came from his dad and family. And then evangelism with A.T. Reed, all shape him.
So do you think he went there to get a degree? Did they have degrees in music at that time, or
yeah,
was it just
they had
training?
degrees. It's one of the classic conservatories.
But he went there. It got interrupted because of the opportunity
money.
Okay.
Money really entered in because he had to help his mom, to be fair. And so he didn't take the degree. I don't think he really meant to. It wasn't that big a deal in those days. So he goes into evangelism, then he becomes an evangelist himself. And he is ordained in 1900, a Congregationalist, though he'll change his affiliation to the Orange Presbytery in the Carolinas later. Yeah, Schofield came to the Lord in 1879. He was a ex-Attorney General of Kansas, but he drank far too much and ruined his opportunities. And in 1879, separated from his wife and girls, moved to St. Louis and came under the influence of James Hall Brooks, the great preacher, who led him to Christ.
An early dispensationalist.
Yes, he was very much. And he's in that ilk. And, of course, Schofield will write in 1892 that pamphlet on rightly understanding the Word of God. So these all converge, you don't know it, at the time. And so when Mr. Moody died in 1899, Schofield returned to Dallas and later went to France, Switzerland, to work on the Scofield Reference Bible.
So Chafer was influenced by a lot of movers and shakers in that early
that
dispensational.
day,
Yeah, Scofield, Arnold Gabeline, you mentioned Thomas.
A.T. Pearson,
Moody,
the list goes.
these are-
B.B. Sutcliffe, the list is long.
Yeah.
And
Any interaction with Brooks as well? James Brooks?
he does all the way through. Brooks dies, I think, the late 90s, 1890s. But in the old Bible conference movement, it was called the Niagara Bible Conference Movement, grew out of Believers Bible Conference Movement, renamed, and that lasted back until about 1901, when dispute over eschatological views severed it.
Between Presbyterians and Baptists?
Yeah, pretty much. It was sad. So Chafer then really travels with Scofield. He's a clone. Well, that's it.
Yeah.
It's just pretty.
So heavily influenced by the emphasis upon teaching the Word,
teaching.
Bible conference movement. That's
Yeah.
part of the DNA of who he was. And
The Bible Exposition Department here began staffed by itinerant Bible conference men, and they would come for a week or month or two and teach through the Bible. And that understanding of I don't mean simple understanding at all, but I mean a clear understanding of the Bible. The emphasis was the Bible, because we were fighting liberals at that time, and the gospel.
in just a moment, we will return to our previously recorded program. But first, our missions moment of the week. I'd like to introduce you to Sharif, a graduate of the National Theological Graduate School in Egypt.
My name is Sharif Anis. I'm from Cairo, Egypt. I earned my master's degree from National Theological Graduate School. NTCGS changed my life. I used to work in the middle management of Vodafone Egypt. I was just helping in my church at that time. Now I'm working in two ministries. One, my full-time ministry is related to evangelizing and discipling new believers. I manage a team of 40 people whom I trained to do this job. Also, I teach in the bachelor degree for National Theological College. I teach church history and Old Testament survey. I'm really grateful for the investment that NTCGS have put in me to be a good servant to the Lord and give Him the glory He deserves for the rest of my life.
If you'd like to help students like Sharif to attend the National Theological College and Graduate School in Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and East Africa, you can learn more and give financially at ntcgs.org. That's ntcgs.org. Now, back to our previously recorded program. So you do have a chapter in your book, An Uncommon Union, subtitled Dallas Theological Seminary and American Evangelicalism, a chapter on the unique challenges of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. That was the impetus for the forming of Dallas Seminary. Would you tell us a little bit more?
As Dr. Chafer, Dr. Scofield founded the Southfield Bible Conferences out of Florida. And so he and Chafer would travel through and often go to seminaries. And I think it was at Union Richmond that he encountered a group of students and asked them to analyze their education. And it really shaped him, because they said, we learn about the Bible, but not the Bible. And so the Bible conference movement, Bible colleges, and now Dallas Seminary, just emphasizes the Holy Scriptures in a very serious way. And I think that's all part of our tradition.
Yeah, so as modernism was impacting the seminaries and the denominations, and so a de-emphasis upon the Bible and it being inspired and inerrant.
And rightly dividing the Word of God. I mean, the liberal was basically saying, unless you become a student of textual criticism and understand how to exegete the Holy Scriptures and find the real Holy Scriptures in it,
And remove the myths and the legends.
Yeah, myths. And I think the Bible conference movement it was a lay grassroots movement. In the summer, industry is producing vacations for workers. What do you do? It met a real need in that context.
And you talk in the book, it's a great book, by the way, I recommend it, that Dallas is, did you say a square peg in a circle hole?
Yeah.
Because of it's coming out of a situation where denominations don't have somewhere, a denomination to send their graduates. It's interesting.
If you put your mind in Dr. Chafer, Dr. Chafer was a fundamentalist. No, he had fundamentalist leanings deeply, but he was not a fundamentalist.
Could you define that for our listeners?
The difference between the two is in J. Frank Norris or John R. Rice, that militant sort of campaigning, stomping attitude that we are right, highly separatistic, into secondary separation, meaning we separate from those who don't have the sense to do it. Chafer was more of a, I don't mean it wrong, but more of a gathering of the body of Christ. So he could labor in different traditions. He's ordained in the Orange Presbytery and stays there until the Lord takes him home.
Do you think that's partly because of his itinerant preaching ministry, where he engaged with lots of different Christians and lots of different...
You intersect with a lot of different traditions. And in Dallas Seminary, when you analyze its foundational assumptions, we have really three traditions antithetical historically, blowing right through us. We've combined three things. So generally in our theology, we would be Reformed or Calvinistical. Chafer's theology is a Bible exposition of Charles Hodge, the previous century. So when it comes to the doctrine of unmerited mercy, the doctrine of, we call grace, human inability, he really follows the Calvinistic tradition without being a full-blown Calvinist. So he's fundamentalistic, he's Calvinistic, but he also embraces Keswick sanctification theories, which Reformed people don't. And so in Keswick, you need two great works of grace to walk with God, redemption and consecration. And they see them as fundamental. And it's usually out of Romans 12:1, present your body a living sacrifice, which certainly is valid and true. It's whether it's a one-time event or not becomes the issue. So we're Calvinistic. We are mildly holiness, but we're also dispensational premillennial.
So tell us a little bit about the early days of the establishment of the school and the challenges they faced.
In 1921, with Dr. Schofield dying, the Chafers were living in Orange, New Jersey, suburb of New York, because he taught in the New York Night School of the Bible. So Bible conference becoming a curriculum. In that context, Chafer was invited, and he'd done conferences here in Dallas with Schofield to return as pastor of Schofield Church, his church. He took that opportunity and came here. He aligns with William M. Anderson, pastor of First Pres downtown. And Anderson is the man that really pressed him to have the school here. There's a lady in his church that gave us her rental facility on Hughes Circle. It was a dorm, for 13 students or 12. And we were there for 2 years. Dr. Chafer's dream was a 3-year THB degree, which was the standard degree of the day. And his dream was to enter 30 students a year and max out at 100. Well, 13 would do well, but then you get a second year and it's already too full. So we had to do something. And through William Anderson, he knew a man by the name of William Gaston, for which Gaston Avenue is named. He was the founder of East Dallas as a city. It'll merge, obviously, later.
It was a city called East Dallas.
Yeah, autonomous city. And he built his mansion or his home in 1879 here at Apple and Swiss. And if you look at our campus from Stearns down to Swiss, there's a big empty place. That's where the mansion's at. And we tore down the mansion. Well, in 1928, they built Stearns. 29, they built Davidson. And that was our campus until 52 when we built Chafer Chapel. So everything was there. Library was on the 3rd floor. Dining was on the lower floor. Dorm was Stearns. So it's just beautiful. And that's how we moved here.
And the classes were at First Presbyterian Church?
Up to that point. They were, the residence was on Hughes Circle, which is now just off from Old City Park, Dallas, the other side of I-30. And the classes were held at First Pres.
And the pastor's name again was, remind me?
William M. Anderson, Jr.
Anderson. So we have lots of pictures with him in it. And
he succeeded his dad,
a
senior. But he will leave Dallas about 1929 and take a pastorate in the East. But so a lot of factors are converging.
Was he a Presbyterian dispensationalist?
I don't think so.
Okay, he was very supportive of Chafer.
Because the bigger issue was the gospel and the Bible. And even Dr. Chafer was in the Orange Presbytery, so they didn't press him on his non-covenantal approach to the Holy Scriptures. There are bigger fish to fry, I think. When there aren't, you get mad over little fish. So that's how that happened. The major funding for our buildings here on campus came from a lady by the name of Mrs. Wilson. She's forgotten later. There's always forgotten people. Only God knows. And she supplied, she paid for Stearns Hall. And Minor Stearns was then a student. His dad was a pastor in Philadelphia area. And Minor will go to Belgium as a missionary after he graduates. It's just all kind of wonderful connections that brought this thing. Davidson Hall is named for Lydie Davidson, the mother of a board member, Davidson. He paid for it. We didn't have the money.
So now, First Presbyterian in Dallas doesn't have any connection with Dallas Seminary anymore for many years.
Yeah,
right?
they went. There's acrimony between the emerging premillennial dispensational approach and covenantalists, and that caused a rigidifying of the camps. Both camps are at fault, to be fair. We criticized them for not reading the Bible with the correct hermeneutic, that kind of stuff. And they criticized us for inventing things. So it's sad. I hope that doesn't, I know it does exist, but I hope it doesn't as much now.
Yeah. Well, one thing I appreciate about the Evangelical Theological Society is you have to see each other once a year. So if you speak badly, poorly about someone, you might think twice because you have become friends with them, hopefully. And engagement to interact with them.
The past still shapes us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has indeed been another fascinating discussion. It is so interesting to learn about the men and women of church history that God has used in remarkable ways for His glory. We are thankful for the vision and fortitude of Dr. Chafer and Dr. Walvoord. But we're not finished discussing the history and legacy of Dallas Theological Seminary, so you'll need to join us again for our next episode. In our next Bible and Theology Matters podcast, we will discuss the history and growth of DTS under the leadership of its third, fourth, and fifth presidents, Dr. Don Campbell, Dr. Chuck Swindoll, and Dr. Mark Bailey. You won't want to miss it. But until then, please consider subscribing to this podcast wherever it is that you download your podcasts, or on YouTube if you're viewing this episode. This will ensure that you are notified when new episodes become available, and leave us a 5-star review and leave us a question or comment. These actions will help our program become more accessible to other believers who are looking for faith-building content. Thank you for your consideration. Until next time, never forget, Bible and theology really does matter, because what you really believe determines how you really behave.
Bible and Theology Matters podcast is a listener-supported podcast
devoted to helping Christians grow in their knowledge of the Word of God and in their relationship to the God of the Word.
To learn how you can partner with the Bible and Theology Matters podcast,
Visit us at BibleandTheologyMatters.com. That's Bible, A-N-D, TheologyMatters.com.